probably covered, but if they get a little ahead or behind, it's fine. We'll figure it out and catch up. So they'll do what they want, and we'll figure it out. But thank you to them for volunteering to help. Okay. Before we get to the lesson this morning, which is lesson 3, let's quick review our first 2 lessons. First, we've taken this class book is from 2 Peter chapter 1, verses primarily 5 through 7. The Christian grace is add to your faith, virtue, knowledge, and self-control. But the broader context, verses 3 through 10, he kind of backed up and set the context in the first 2 lessons. So the first lesson was partakers of the divine nature, idea of being transformed, putting off the old man, putting on a new man, walking in newness of life, being transformed. And then the second lesson was giving all diligence, to bring our efforts alongside God hastily, eagerly. So that's kind of what we started with. And now, the first one of these Christian graces, well, I don't know what to call it the first or not. Some people number, there is either 7 or 8. It depends on whether you consider faith to be one of them, or faith to be what you're going to add all the other ones to. So there's 7 plus faith. 8, if you count it that way. But anyway, lesson 3 is on faith, which is, I don't know if I use the word define, but certainly described pretty well in Hebrews 11. So we'll certainly spend some time there in Hebrews 11. I'm going to use the word foundation for faith, okay? Because it's kind of the starting point or the prerequisite onto which we add all these other characteristics. So it's got to exist first. You know, if I'm patient and loving and all that kind of stuff, but I don't have faith, is it going to do me any good? There are people who are patient in the world, but don't have faith. Are they going to be saved? No, we're going to need faith. So faith's got to be the foundation, and then we add all these other things to it. Yeah, go ahead, David.
It's just a quick question. Would having trust first lead you into faith, or?
Actually, trust is closely related to faith. Some people consider it kind of one of the aspects of faith. Belief and trust, kind of. So faith's a little bit hard to completely pin down exactly what we mean when we're talking about it. It's kind of like, I know it when I see it. So, but trust is kind of one of the aspects of faith. So I would kind of sort of, I don't know if it's called a synonym, but certainly a component of faith. Yeah, so trust is certainly closely related to it. Speaking of foundation, I just try to kind of come up with, I'm a math guy, so, I mean, in order for kids to really learn math, they got to be able to count, right? If they don't know their numbers, how are they going to add, subtract, multiply, divide, do anything else, okay? So, let's learn how to count first, and then we can do stuff with the numbers, right? Or, that's the English professor, so they got to know their alphabet, right? A through Z, because they can't spell words, make sentences, so that's kind of the idea. That's what faith is like. It's like the building block, okay? The chief cornerstone, if you think of it that way. Just like Jesus is the cornerstone of the church, well, faith is upon which we build all these other characteristics to be pleasing to God. So that's the way I look at it. Anybody want to agree or disagree or add to that before we get any further? You don't have to just accept everything I say as truth. I mean, I could be wrong. It wouldn't be the first time. What will I ask? Well, we'll get to Hebrews 11, but I actually want to start in Romans 10. So go ahead and turn to Romans 10. They reference a couple verses, verses 9 and 10, but I think we should read a little further to get the context. So I think he's still on that subject for a while. So we're going to read Romans 10, verses 9 through 17. So 8 or 9 verses. And then kind of comment on some of the different things he talks about related to faith. So someone who likes to read verses 9 through 17 of Romans 10, please.
Verse 9. And if you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus, and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart one believes unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. For the Scripture says, whoever believes on him will not be put to shame. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord over all is rich to all who call upon him. For whosoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved.
In 17.
How then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without preaching? And how shall they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the gospel of peace, who bring glad tidings of good things. But they have not all obeyed the gospel, for Isaiah says, Lord, who hath believed our report? So then faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God.
And I think David's, which translation are you using? New King James. Mine's one I use is ESV, but the only time in mine, and I think David's also, that the word faith was used is verse 17. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. But that same Greek word that's translated faith in verse 17 is used throughout verses 9 through 16 also. It just wasn't translated faith. It's the same Greek word pistis. What do you think is being translated throughout the rest of those verses there? Believe. And believe is certainly part of faith. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a complete synonym, but it's a large component of it. So when we talk about faith, we're definitely talking about belief and trust. And probably some other things that kind of mix in there. I think if we all wrote down our own definition of faith, no two of us would have exactly the same thing. But we'd all have something similar, I would think. All right, what are some things you noticed about belief or faith? I got some, but I thought I'd be open to you to start out with. Trying to get the idea of this sense of what faith is. Where does it come from?
He puts faith here in the heart. They believe in
Okay.
their heart.
Which in the heart, is that the pumping organ? So when they use the word heart in Scripture, what are they referring to? The mind, yeah. So I'm sure that's what you meant. Yeah. So it resides or comes from the heart, the mind, the inner being, you would say, the real us, not this earthly physical tent, not this pumping organ, but the seat of our emotions and intellect and so on. David?
I think you study with somebody that has kind of trust in that person, to study with them, and then as they start teaching, then the belief comes in. And then the deep dive is faith in what is taking place.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. It certainly helps to build some sort of trust with the person if you want to have a chance to convert them. And they have to be open to it. You know, Pharaoh hardened his heart. Was anybody going to get through to Pharaoh? Not while his heart was hardened. So the heart has to be receptive to it, kind of like the soils in the parable of the sower. I mean, if it's rocky ground and the seed can't penetrate it, it's not going to be able to germinate and grow and produce. So, yeah.
Faithful part of his heart, does that mean it believe, or does it mean he believed and rejected?
I won't be dogmatic about this, but I get the idea of stubbornness. He's just decided, I ain't gonna accept that. There's probably more to it than that, but I think that's part of it. I knew as soon as I brought up that illustration, somebody's asked me questions. I shouldn't have done that. Try to get me, if it was a college class, they try to get me off on a tangent for 50 minutes, so we didn't cover anything, and they didn't have homework, but yeah, there were times sometimes when God hardens someone's heart, which, don't ask me what that means, but I don't think it means exactly what it sounds like it means. In other words, I don't think it means that God took them over and prevented them from, but I'm not sure how I would convince you of that. The second time.
It could also be that maybe he didn't make it known to them what was really going on. I mean, that's sort of what happened on the road after Jesus was resurrected.
Okay, so kind of didn't reveal everything that was okay. That might be
Like
part of
A
it.
plus B equals C for most people, but like for them it might be A plus B now is DC.
Mhm.
So, you know, it's one of those things that was veiled and maybe that's what hardening them.
Maybe.
Obviously, it'll go over.
Yeah,
That's a whole other thing.
I wasn't intending to get off on this tangent, but go ahead, David.
I think that he had a term called belief perseverance. In other words, no matter what he was told, he was going to stay the course of the way he was.
Okay, yeah, certainly sometimes we hang on to what we have believed. You know, for example, if our parents taught us that, then we don't want to do depart from that, even if we have evidence to the contrary. So we're kind of stuck on that, and choosing to be stuck on that, despite perhaps evidence to the contrary. That wasn't where I intended to go with this. You can go there if you want. But what else? What other things about faith did you notice here in Romans 10, verses 9 through 17? Jason mentioned coming from the heart. What else? Yeah.
He connects it there to hearing. I mean, you've got to have a message presented to you. You have to hear. You can't believe if you've not heard.
Got to be something to believe, information, evidence.
To hear. And so often, Jesus did call on people, and there's a choice in hearing. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. You have to actively participate in that. I know we think of hearing as being kind of a passive.
Oh, listening. Listening
You have
is
to
active.
choose. You have to choose to really hear this, really listen to it.
Remember sometimes when Jesus was preaching, what would the people do? They would stop their ears, literally. They'll put their hands over the other. We're not listening anymore. And they would, I think that's what they did when they were about to stone him. Let that happen, but they weren't going to listen to him anymore. Hearing, in this sense, listening is a choice. It's we can choose not to. The physical organ might be picking up the sound waves, but the message is not penetrating because we're not going to let it. What else? So we got the aspects of. I forgot the first one, Jason. Lost it. Even hearing was the second one. I forgot the first one you mentioned. Oh, the heart.
The heart, yeah.
What else? Trying to get this idea of faith. What is it?
I just would say, I would back up on the term of what it's not your physical part, it's your spiritual part.
Okay. Yeah. Your spiritual heart would be more of the mind. What's the relationship of faith to obedience? I don't know if you caught verse 16. Verse 16 of Romans 10. But they have not all obeyed the gospel. For Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed what he has heard from us? So he uses the word obey, but then he uses the word believed, which is our word faith. Pistis, faith. Are they synonymous? How does obedience relate to faith? Tamara? So does obedience naturally follow faith? Should. And if it doesn't, is that the kind of faith that's going to save? Okay, so obedience has to work hand in hand with it. James talks about that a lot. James 2. Faith has to lead to obedience or it's not going to be saving faith. We mentioned demon faith. They believe, but doesn't do them any good, right? What else? What else did you get out of Romans 10 here? I think it's rich. That's why I read it. Bigger context. The side margin of page 21 in your lesson just has Romans 10:10 there. I'll just use it that way. We all use the same translation because it's there. For with the heart one believes unto righteousness. And again, believe there is our word pistis for faith. You could say with the heart one has faith unto righteousness. Or some of your versions instead of righteousness uses justified or something like that. So, sure sounds like faith is going to be required to be righteous, to be justified. Comments, other things to add?
So regarding faith, I've heard it preached that that's all on man. God did his part, but whether you believe or not, that's all on man. I don't think the Bible teaches that. Even when it talks about having ears to hear, the Old Testament, Moses told them, God didn't give you ears to hear. So I think God is the starting spot of faith.
Well, certainly, if faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God, we got to have some evidence to put our faith into and on. So, without that, we have faith in. So yeah, that's got to be the starting point.
Got grants, faith.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how I define grant, but yeah. I'll share with you something that I got from the lesson book that I think is a fairly good way of looking at it. He kind of breaks faith down into sort of two components. He called it belief with trust. So belief is like the intellectual assent, but then the trust is the accepting the evidence that's saying, I think this is true, and I'm going to act a certain way because of it. So belief and trust kind of working hand in hand. I thought, okay, I sort of followed that. It's always seemed like there's a little bit more to it, so we're going to head to Hebrews 11 in a minute, but anything else you want to bring up from Romans 10 here might kind of come back up, which is fine.
The 17 faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. We taught that. Young up in the church. 5 steps to your life.
Right, hear, believe, repent, yeah. Which is more of an integrated process than steps, but yeah.
The fact that it comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God, you do see a faith does come from God. It was
Yep.
granted by God, like we say it. And we never have opportunity to hear the word. You hear that question all the time. We never have the opportunity. Is it their fault, or is it
I don't think we can worry about that. I think God will take care of it.
He will. Takes care of everything.
Okay. You can always stop me, we can always go back, but let's spend some time in Hebrews today, jumping around some in chapter 11. A lot of people start in verse 1, which would be fine. I wouldn't probably call it a definition, although I'm sure I called it that in the past. Because it says, now faith is, that sounds like it's defining it. It's certainly giving some aspects or characteristics of it. Well, I don't know if it's comprehensive or all-inclusive. I actually want to start in verse 6 with kind of the motivation for faith. Hebrews 11:6. And we think we mentioned this maybe in the last class, and it's got kind of two parts to it. It says, and without faith, it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who seek him. So this first part it starts with is, if you don't have faith, it's impossible to please God. Is faith essential? Sure sounds like it. We gotta have it. Okay. Well, that's why I call it the foundation. If you don't start with that, the other stuff, the other things we're going to add to faith, virtue, knowledge, and self-control, and brotherly kindness and love, those are all important. But without faith, they're not going to get the job done. So we start with faith. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. It says, for, and then it mentions two things. If you want to draw near to God, here's what you got to do. You got to believe that he exists. We mentioned this in the last class, I believe. You got to believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who seek him. Let's start with that first one there. Believe that he exists. I think the sense here is, I'm not discounting hope, but I'm saying I don't think it's sufficient to be in a place where we say, I really hope there's a God. I think we got to be more convinced than that. I think there's a God. I hope there's a God. No. I think we got to go beyond that. Okay? To faith that there's a God means more than simple hope. I think so. It's a firm belief. If you go to verse 1, it's the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It's not flimsy or wishy-washy. In fact, I'm just going to flip over to James 1 real quickly just to kind of contrast. I had a little further down my notes, but it kind of seems to fit now. So, because he paints a kind of a good picture of what they should not be like in James 1. Let me find it here. Yeah, James 1 verse 6. He's just mentioned, talking about, lack wisdom, ask God, but let him ask in faith, with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. And then he kind of calls him unstable, double-minded, So, is that the kind of faith we should have? This doubting, unstable, blown about by the wind type of faith? I don't think so. Okay, so that's the contrast. That's not that kind of faith. That's the wishy-washy, hope so, think so faith. No. It's got to be grounded. It's got to have some conviction and firmness to it. I'll pause it. Comments. Just accept everything I say, guys. I'm not the authority on this. I just have to do one thing up front. Dave?
Yeah, well, throughout my life, the things I see in my life, they're going to have to be this, I mean, you can really.
So you're convinced?
Yeah.
You're convicted?
I'm convinced, yeah, because even in sports, look, a few years ago, Tom Brady was down so many points, but that guy had to believe that they could win that game, and he never did. There's so many sports events that's happened, and it's not just that, it's everything. Like, look at my life, I'm Brady, I think Phillips and Frank, and Cole. It's just remarkable how I got relief, from the worries I had, his arguments, his comments. And so, I mean, there's just, if you look around, you can find it, we had a car accident one time, and I could actually hear the brakes knocking up on that car that was coming, didn't even see it. And it hit, where it hit on the side of my car, when the rescue people came there, they said, well, who was in that car? And I said, well, I was. Well, what you want to walk around? Well, we were cutting people out of the car. I just got out on the side. Now, I had a lot of tissue hurting in days after that. But it's just things like that I looked over her and I said, brace yourself. We're going to get you. That's all I said. And I remember at that point, I just knew it was whatever God told me. And I walked away from that. And they just many things that people just looked at how when you really trust in God and ask God, and you're not always going to get what you want. And that's probably a good teaching moment to know that you're not going to.
You always want the right thing.
And we talked about the heart. And now the heart comes in a lifetime. Well, that's just how much you should be studying and understanding the Word of God. You should have faith like your heart does, keeping your life. You should look at that pump going. And that's what you should be doing, gaining knowledge and trying your best to be a better person. And you're never going to reach it. You're never going to reach it. You just got to keep trying.
Well, we certainly can reach the point where our heart, our inner heart, our mind is convicted by the evidence that this is true. There is a God. I believe in it. I mean, like, we sometimes say, with all my heart. That's what we mean. With all my heart. I really, really believe this. What else? Sorry. Liz and then Julie.
At 5, my mom had me baptized. I grew up in the church. I didn't grow up in the church, but so I went through my life until I started studying with Kenny, 15 years ago. That, well, I'm baptized, I'm good, I'm saved. I didn't have that conviction yet until we really started to study it. And then by faith, that was like, I had thought to do this. I understood. At 5, I had no clue what was going on. My point was being that you can't have somebody else's faith can't save.
Right.
It has to
You
be
said your
God.
mom had you baptized.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, I mean, I'll get to you in just a second, Julie. I didn't forget you. Just what you said reminded me of this. Remember in Acts chapter 8, the Ethiopian eunuch, when he asks, see, here's water, what hinders me from being baptized? What does Philip tell him? If you believe, you may. Now, at age 5, did she believe? I doubt it. I mean, I don't know you at 5, but most 5-year-olds, they ain't ready. Right? I think that's pretty safe to say. Yeah, it's got to be something. Our faith has to be our own. In fact, we a lot of times tell college students that are going off to college, you need to make your faith your own. Because there's some sense in which it's, I mean, your parents have brought you up in the church. Did you decide to get up every Sunday morning and go? Yes and no. Because if you hadn't, you'd have gone anyway, because your parents would have dragged you out of bed, right? So, but In college, guess what? No one's doing that. I mean, it's tempting sometimes to want to, but no, we kind of leave it up to you guys, don't we? Because you got to want to do it. Julie, what were you saying?
Actually, I was just bringing attention to Liz, but then I was gonna say pretty much what you just said, because you were gonna call him anyway, but that was what I was gonna say. We always told our kids the same thing, like, this is, we're making you go, yes, this is, following through, but one day you're gonna be an adult and have to find your own faith and your own relationship with God. It can't be ours or what, we say you should do.
Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. That's the goal, but again, it's going to be their choice. They're their own person. They become an adult and they make their own choices.
Kind of going off of that is like, so when in that stage of life, I think it's important to kind of separate yourself at some point from like the origin of your faith, I guess, like being your parents or like your home or like your home congregation. Almost to kind of test yourself. Like it's hard to know the strength of your own faith when you're constantly like, I want to say like being fed by like your parents or whoever, but like you just kind of have to like see for yourself where you're at and kind of separate yourself from, like make it not as safe for yourself to kind of see where you are in your own faith. If that makes sense.
I mean, physically that's true. I mean, both humans and other animals, we wean our children, which means we feed them to the point where now they can feed themselves. And now it's their responsibility. At some point, I mean, when we kind of leave our parents, a lot of us, at some point, maybe not right away, but we get married and we leave father and mother and cleave to our spouse. We become one flesh. Now we got a new family. We're not that they're still our mom and dad, we still listen to them, but we've kind of cut the apron strings. We're on our own. Okay? And we can't depend on their faith to get us to heaven. It's got to be. By the way, general comment, if you're in the back, make sure you move. Because I may not see, if your hand's just kind of still up there, I may not see you. So, wave. Flag me down, please. General. Yeah, I mean, we're going to have help. If we have faith, we're not on our own. God's going to help us. So, and like Gamaliel's conclusion in Acts 5 is, you're not going to be able to overthrow it. You're fighting against God. You're going to win. We can't have our faith torn away from us against our will. I'm making that statement. You can disagree if you want, but I believe that. We can have circumstances thrown at us and make us really hard to hang on to our faith. And I think that happens to a lot of people. So people will say, I gave up on my faith because a loved one died or whatever, and I couldn't believe that God would allow evil to exist, those sorts of things. Listen, that would be hard. I've been lucky in my life. I've not really lost loved ones to tragedy. I mean, I've lost loved ones, but they've been grandparents that were old. We kind of saw it coming. And so, I'm not saying that's easy, but it's not the same thing as, like, if I lost a child or something like that. That would be much harder. But I don't think that destroys our faith necessarily. It's a trial, it's a test of faith. Let's see if it's real. And I'm not saying God does it intentionally, but the testing of our faith produces patience, right? It strengthens it through trial. James talks about that. We're not promised that we're tested faith and never will be tested. Did God test Abraham's faith? We're going to talk a lot about Abraham on Wednesday, so I don't want to steal David's thunder. But that's what the kind of whole second half is using Abraham. So I'll try not to step on your toes too much. Other comments on this, David?
I just want to say with that he didn't go to church, believe God, and he said, the way some of these Christians act, and I just looked at it and I said, well, if you were to start studying, you're going to find out, that Christian that you're upset with has nothing to do with how you should get. Maybe you should get involved in church and upset with
yeah, it's certainly true that, I mean, we're Christians. Do we always set the best example for other people? And no. So, I mean, there's some truth to that, but that doesn't excuse others of responsibility. So, I had a question to throw out there for you guys. Has God provided enough evidence that everyone can believe? Okay. Is there enough evidence of God's existence for everyone to believe? Not everybody grows up in a Christian household, for example, or in a free country where it's relatively easy to get a Bible or to listen to preaching and so on. I mean, it's kind of locked down in some places. So I'm talking about them too. Certainly it's harder in some areas, but basically.
In Romans 1, Paul says there's enough evidence from creation itself to know that there's God. I mean, you may not know everything until Paul makes the argument later in Romans, you've got to have the message preached, you've got to have somebody sent. So, yes, until you have that information, you didn't know enough to be saved, but you can know that there's God.
And so therefore to seek him, and then God will find a way for you to get the message. Yeah. So I think what in evidence you guys call it natural revelation. So just in nature, there's pattern, there's design. Like this didn't come about by accident or by some big bang or something like that, which a lot of people believe, but I don't. Other comments on that? I don't agree with Jason either. Okay. Let's see. I have Romans 8. You don't have to turn there. I'll just read what you can. Romans 8, verses 24 and 25 brings up this aspect relating to Hebrews 11:1 about things not seen. So, do you have to be able to see something in order to believe it? I don't believe so. It helps. It makes it easier, but that maybe God expects us to believe it even though we haven't seen it. Romans chapter 8, verses 24 and 25. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. It doesn't use the word faith there. The other illustration I thought of was Thomas in John chapter 20. So let me turn there and then we'll give you a chance to comment. Because Thomas said something very interesting, I think. And Jesus' response to him also is very interesting. So John chapter 20, I'm going to read verses 24 through 29. You'll recognize this, I think. This is after Jesus' resurrection. He's appeared to his apostles, but Thomas wasn't with them. So they're telling Thomas didn't get to see it yet. So Jesus is risen. And 11 of the 12 apostles have seen him, but Thomas hasn't. Thomas is unseen. Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. All right. So, address this idea of not seeing and yet believing, or having faith without having seen. I didn't say without evidence. I said without seeing. Take that where you go.
Sometimes it is more. He didn't believe because he hadn't seen with his eyes. He had some evidence by eyewitness accounts.
Yep.
And based on that, we must all believe. That's all we have, eyewitness accounts. And so there's plenty of evidence. Even though you don't see things, we believe all kinds of things this is the normal world that we haven't seen. Yeah, that's where you gotta be careful. You have to believe everything you're told, right?
Not everything, no. You need evidence for it. Should Thomas have believed? Or could Thomas have believed before he saw? Yeah. Are we expected to? So, apparently there's enough evidence, even without witnessing it ourselves, based on other people's accounts and other things, we've got enough. And so God expects it. And that may not sound fair, but I think God's the judge of whether that's fair or not. And God thinks it's fair. So I'm going to go with him.
So I think it's interesting, because even like Saul here, is not all he believes. So
That's
seeing isn't necessarily a one-to-one correlation to belief. So people can see something and then a lot, people's motives are different. Like some people follow him for just for food or just some like some spiritual just like discredit him.
So seeing it isn't always believing it, even when you do see it. Remember the rich man and Lazarus? The rich man in being in torments asked Jesus, asked Abraham, asked Abraham, can you send someone back to talk to my brother so believe? He said, they didn't listen to Moses. They had Moses and the prophets. If they didn't listen to them, they're not going to listen even if I send somebody back from the dead. Because some people aren't going to believe, like Pharaoh, I guess. I mean, just stubborn or hard-hearted or whatever. Even seeing is not going to do it for them. It could have, but they're choosing not to. That's the way I would put it. I may not quite phrase it that way, but I think they're hardened in their own heart. There. What time? 10:15? Okay, so we got 5 more minutes. I don't really care where I get to because it's David's problem after that. So, but I got a little bit more here, so we may kind of jump into where David's going to pick up. I don't know, but I had one other. Let's just go ahead and turn to one other passage that I had down, Romans 4. This gets in, starts talking about Abraham, which I'm sure is where David's going to take you on Wednesday, but you can always come back to it. Romans 4, verses 19 through 22. Someone who's got that, please read. Romans 4, 19 through 22. Yep, that's it. By the way, that is a quote from Genesis 15, verse 6, where Abraham believed God and his faith was counted as righteousness. Which is part of what I want to bring out. But remember Abraham had these promises made to him in Genesis chapter 15. How old was Abraham when the promises started to be fulfilled? He was told he was going to, by his seed, the seed promise. When did he have the son of promise? How old was he? About 100. Sarah was 90. Sarah was 90. Now men, I don't know if they do the biology back then. Men can continue to father children pretty much throughout their entire lives. Women, typically not. Somewhere around 40, early mid-40s, they run out of eggs. Basically, so women don't have children beyond a certain point. Sarah would have been beyond that point, biologically speaking. I'm guessing Abraham knew that. So I don't know how much biology they knew, but enough. They knew how things work to a certain degree, right? So God told him, you're gonna have a son through Sarah, because remember they tried it through Hagar. And God said, no, that's not what I meant. Through Sarah. Did that take some faith on Abraham's part? Would you have had trouble believing that if you were the one who's told that?
Technically, Sarah was when she was not.
And there's one sense in which you'd be right, because that's impossible. Right? It would be impossible except with God. There's no such thing. And Abraham believed that. I mean, he really believed it. You know, he didn't let any unbelief no unbelief made him waver. That's pretty good. I would have had some wavering and some unbelief there. I would have wrestled with that one, right? But in hindsight, looking back on it, is there any reason why Abraham should have not trusted God? He really believed in. You got to talk to Abraham. He knew there was a God. Yeah, I could do it. How's he going to do it? Don't have to know how. I'll figure it out. Don't worry about that. What else did you get from Romans 4, or just anything else? We got 2 or 3 minutes, so otherwise you got to save it for Wednesday. Yeah.
I think even now we have all this evidence. There's something that God still wants us to believe in, even if we don't have evidence or foot in the sand. Like in Hebrews 1, it talks about angels being ministering spirits to us. Do we understand how that works? No, but I mean we're supposed to believe it.
Yeah.
And so I think that even back then, there's people obviously that didn't have the full story. We don't have the full story, but we're still supposed to believe this thing.
We trust in the evidence and the power of God. Even though I don't really get how I can do that or how that works, I don't know. But I'll trust because I've got enough evidence and I, deep down in my heart, know this is right. Yeah. So trust certainly is an aspect of faith, I think. Other comments? I had a line drawn that kind of said, at this point, if I go any further than this, I'm running into David's stuff. So this is about, I just reached it.
Sure.
Yeah. David and then Jason.
I was just going to say, just imagine what you may go through his mind when he was at sacrifices son, and he was getting ready.
That's really stepping on David's toes. So. Yeah, that's going to absolutely.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's the ultimate test of Abraham's faith. I'm sure he's going to get to that on Wednesday. Jason, you're going to go there. Yep. Okay. All right. And I'll see you in about 3 weeks. And thank you to David and Daniel and I think it's Ethan, for taking over for me.